So the title of the challenge is, how can technology help us to reuse digital resources across the public sector in Scotland? By digital resources we mean the skills of the people we have, the processes that we use, and the technology we have access to across the various organisations.
So there's lots of good work happens across the public sector and across the Scottish Government in digital projects. And as we move forward, things are changing more and more. And there's hardly any projects that won't have a digital element in there of some way, be it a piece of technology or an approach or a process or a certain set of skills that somebody needs to develop.
The problem really is that across the public sector, lots of organisations are running digital projects and programs, trying to transform themselves into digital organisations. And at the moment, they don't really have a way of finding out what other people have been doing. And therefore, there's lots of organisations who are essentially spending money and time trying to solve similar problems, or in some cases, the same problem. And what we're trying to really provide is a way of those organisations joining up and knowing what each other is doing, and therefore making the best use of the resources that we have.
So as an example of things that are being repeated multiple times, organisations across the sector are all trying to solve the way that they can use cloud more efficiently and the way that they can use the services that are available in the cloud. At the moment, those organisations are all doing that separately, and there are some that are further along the journey than others. And if they could share that information as to how they have solved those problems, then the people who are just slightly further behind them will be able to benefit from that rather than having to start from the beginning again.
What many people don't appreciate is the Scottish public sector is not only a very large organisation, it's an enormously diverse organisation as well. You have organisations with multi-billion pound budgets, right down to very small organisations of perhaps tens of people, all of whom operate fairly independently using different project management methodologies, different governance regimes, and in order to get knowledge from across this diverse range of organisations is extremely hard, given the fact there is no central reporting point for things like digital projects.
Quite often when we talk about digital projects, people jump to talking about the technology element, understandably, because that's quite often the interesting thing. But also within those digital projects, there's also ways of working. So there's the people element, the process element, and the technology element. And the technology should always come last. The people element, we need to make sure that organisations have the skills and the capability and the capacity to learn new ways of working. Then also the processes are looking at different ways of improving what we do, and also different approaches, be them project management approaches or just a way to actually tease out a problem using user research or service design. And then the technology isn't always the final element in a project, but the technology can also be reused because it fits with those processes and those pieces and those people.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to make resources available so that they could all at least be aware of the platforms that are already available and perhaps reuse them, and therefore not only save money in providing a service to the public, but also provide the best service they can to the public.
Scottish Government and its organisations probably make up about just over 140 organisations across the country, which have very different remits and are looking at very different policy areas. Then if we add in the wider public sector, that takes us to just over 200 organisations. We're not asking for people to solve a problem across those 200 organisations immediately, but we think there's lots of information out there and it's in lots of different formats, and if we can solve that for a few organisations, we should be able to replicate that across the sector. Part of the ways that we've tried to solve this in the past is through the Digital First Service Standard. There is an element in there, one of the key categories in there is called ecosystem, and that talks about whether or not a project has reused something that already exists or if they've created something that other people can then use. The issue, and that's been a great catalyst for people to talk about reuse, but there still isn't that single place where people can get that information. Also across a few different organisations, they've been looking at this. So we have the local government digital office that's looking at reuse across the 32 local authorities in Scotland, and also there's various NHS agencies such as NHS NSS who create assets that work across Scotland, and they also are looking at how that they can pull together that register of what exists. But there's nothing that is completely comprehensive at the moment.
The use of this solution would be organisations who are in the early stages of setting out their digital project. I think one of the real challenges for the solution is to be able to classify the information about a project in a very useful way. Technology or business processes can be described in multiple different ways, and if we simply take everybody's definition of what they're using, we'll end up with a not very useful register. If you want to query about something like licensing, it would bring all licensing related services back so that end users could query in a useful way to them, but get information that's not necessarily classified exactly as how they would express it.
I think one of the real benefits that we'd like to see come from this challenge is that people reusing assets, reusing processes, reusing the ways that people work and the skills that we have across the sector as efficiently as possible, so that we're constantly being able to improve those products and get into that continuous improvement cycle, rather than organisations having to start from the beginning of a project again. They should just be able to add value on top rather than having to deliver it all separately.